Hello, friends. We are interested in the geography of our views, so please like and write in the comments from which city are you watching us, and were there loud stories of betrayal in your city? Share your stories with us. Maybe the next betrayal story will be from your city. And we start. Dave Miller stood in the middle of the huge living room, his steps echoing off the polished marble floor, and a warm, almost tangible feeling of triumph spreading through his chest. He took a deep breath, smelling the new leather of the sofas and the light aroma of fresh paint that had not yet evaporated from the walls. A penthouse in Manhattan is not just an apartment, but a symbol. A symbol that he, a guy from a small town in Ohio where the biggest event was the opening of a new supermarket, had finally made it through. His fingers gripped the edge of his leather briefcase, which he still hadn't managed to put down on the floor after a long day of work. This was his day, his victory. "Tracy, look at this." Dave's voice trembled with delight as he approached the huge floor-to-ceiling windows. Behind the glass lay Manhattan. The skyscrapers shone in the rays of the setting sun, as if someone had scattered a handful of diamonds across the city. The Empire State Building loomed in the distance like an old king watching over his subjects, and the cars below on Fifth Avenue seemed like ants scurrying about in an endless bustle. "This is our new start, baby. We did it." Tracy stood at the entrance to the living room, her thin fingers still gripping the handle of the suitcase she had dragged from the elevator. She was beautiful, even now, after a 3-hour drive from their old apartment in Brooklyn, with her tousled blonde locks and light shadows under her eyes. She was wearing a cream cashmere sweater and jeans, which she had chosen that morning to look New York casual, as she said. Her lips stretched into a smile, but something about that smile was forced, as if she was keeping it on her face through an effort of will. "Yes, Dave, this is incredible," she said, taking a step forward. Her heels clicked softly on the marble, the sound echoing throughout the empty room. Tracy placed her suitcase against the wall and walked over to her husband, standing next to him by the window. She crossed her arms over her chest, looking out at the city lights. "I didn't even think that we would ever live in such a place." Dave turned to her, his dark brown eyes sparkling with excitement. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with short cropped hair, in which the first gray was already showing, although he was only 36. Today he wore his best suit, a dark blue one, custom-made in a tailor on Madison Avenue. This was his lucky suit, as he called it, the one in which he signed a contract with Harrison and Partners, the financial services company where he was now a senior analyst. Soon, if everything goes as it should, he will become the manager of an entire direction. Big money, prestige. And this penthouse is the first step towards the life he has dreamed of since he left home at 18 with one bag and $100 in his pocket. Can you imagine, Trace? He hugged her waist, pulling her towards him. "We won't count pennies anymore like in Brooklyn. No creaky floors or neighbors yelling through the wall. This is our ticket to another league." Tracy nodded, resting her head on his shoulder. Her hair smelled like vanilla, her favorite shampoo, which she bought from a small store in Greenwich Village. But there was some stiffness in her movements, as if she could not completely relax. She looked at the city, but her gaze wandered, clinging to something invisible beyond the horizon. "I know you worked for this," she said quietly. "You deserve it." "We deserve it," Dave corrected her, squeezing her a little tighter. "You were with me when I spent the night in the office, when we ate instant noodles because there wasn't enough for more. This is your victory too." Tracy turned her head slightly, looking up at him. Her blue eyes met his gaze, and for a second a shadow flashed in them, something similar to anxiety or doubt. But she blinked quickly and the shadow disappeared, replaced by the same soft smile. "You're right," she said. "This is our new start." They stood there for a few more minutes, looking at the city that was now at their feet. The silence of the penthouse enveloped them, broken only by the distant hum of cars below and the occasional rustle when the wind knocked on the glass. Dave felt his heart beat a little faster, not from fatigue, but from anticipation. He was already imagining how he would receive his colleagues here, how he would sit at the massive walnut table in the office that he had already mentally furnished. This was his world, and he finally took his place in it. Tracy moved away from the window. Her movements were smooth, but there was some kind of nervousness in them. She walked over to the boxes that the delivery men had left at the entrance and began unpacking them. Her fingers trembled as she opened the first box, their dishes, which they bought for their wedding 8 years ago. White plates with thin gold rims, slightly worn from time to time, looked incongruous against the background of the glossy splendor of this apartment. "We'll have to buy something new," she muttered, holding the plate in her hands. "This doesn't fit here." Dave laughed as he approached her. He sat down next to her, looking into the box. "Are you serious? These are our plates. They went through thick and thin with us. Remember how you dropped one our first night in Brooklyn, and we spent half the night arguing about who was to blame?" Tracy smiled genuinely this time. Her face lit up with memory, and for a moment she became the girl Dave had met in the bar on the Lower East Side, cheerful, with sparkles in her eyes, ready to argue until she was hoarse about anything. "Then you said that I was clumsy, and I argued that you distracted me with your stupid toast," she said, putting the plate down. "For us, and so that we never become boring. Does it seem so?" "Exactly," Dave nodded, feeling the warmth spreading inside. "And we didn't, right?" Tracy looked at him, and her smile faltered. She didn't answer. She just stood up and walked to another box, taking out a frame with their wedding photo. In the photo, they were laughing, young, carefree, with glasses of champagne in their hands. She placed the photo on the mantelpiece, but her fingers lingered on the glass a little longer than necessary. "We need to order dinner," she said, abruptly changing the subject. "I'm dying of hunger, and I definitely won't cook today." Dave stood up, stretching until his knuckles cracked. He took out his phone and opened the delivery app. "Let's have some sushi." Tracy leaned against the wall, crossing her arms. "And maybe a bottle of wine. We need to celebrate." "Great plan," Dave smiled, quickly placing his order. "He'll be here in half an hour. In the meantime, want to watch the rest of it?" Tracy nodded, and they went to check out the penthouse. The kitchen was gleaming with chrome and marble. The bedroom was the size of their entire old apartment, and the bathroom, with a jacuzzi and shower, looked more like a spaceship. Dave joked that they now needed a guide so they wouldn't get lost, and Tracy laughed, but her laughter was a little quieter than usual. When they returned to the living room, the delivery had already arrived. Dave paid the courier, and Tracy took out a bottle of Sauvignon Blanc and 2 glasses from the box, the same old ones from their life in Brooklyn. They sat on the sofa, placing rolls on the coffee table, and Dave raised his glass. "For us, Trace," he said, looking into her eyes, "for a new start. For this city to become ours." Tracy clinked her glass against his, her glass clinking against his, and she took a sip. The wine was cold, with a slight sourness, but her smile again seemed forced. She looked at Dave, at his delighted face, at his suit, which he never took off, and felt something shrink inside. It was their new start, yes, but for some reason it seemed to her that she was standing on the edge of something completely different. "For us," she repeated quietly, looking away to the window, where the lights of Manhattan continued to burn, indifferent to her thoughts. Tracy Miller sat on the edge of a huge sofa, upholstered in soft gray leather, and looked at the TV screen, where footage of some new series about lawyers was flashing. She did not listen to the dialogues. The words merged into a monotonous hum, like the distant noise of the city outside the windows. On the table in front of her stood a cup of herbal tea, long gone cold, and a plate of half-eaten toast that she had made an hour ago but never finished. The penthouse was spotlessly clean, not a speck of dust on the marble, not a stain on the mirrored surfaces of the kitchen. But this purity only intensified the feeling of emptiness, which every day squeezed her chest more and more. Outside, Manhattan sparkled like a Christmas tree, but Tracy didn't look there. Her gaze wandered around the room, from the crystal chandelier that probably cost more than her first car to the abstract painting on the wall, all blue and gold strokes that Dave called an investment in art. She didn't understand this picture. I didn't understand how anyone could pay tens of thousands of dollars for something that looked like a random sketch. But Dave was delighted, and she didn't argue. Lately, she rarely argues at all. The clock on the wall, minimalistic, with thin hands that seemed to move slower than usual, showed 10:30 in the evening. Dave was still in the office. He left at 7 this morning, kissing her forehead and muttering something about an important deal. She didn't even ask what the deal was. Who cares? All his deals were important. They all demanded his time, his attention, his life. Tracy reached for the phone that was lying next to her on the sofa and opened the messenger. The last message from Dave was sent at 5 in the evening. "I'll be late. Don't wait up. I love you." She read it again, feeling a lump form in her throat. "Don't wait." As if she had a choice. She put the phone down and stood up, her bare feet sinking into the soft pile of the carpet. The penthouse was too big for her alone. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, an office that Dave had already furnished with his books and an expensive chair, and this living room where she felt like a guest. She walked to the window, pressing her palms to the cold glass. Below, life was in full swing. Taxis scurried along the avenue, pedestrians hurried somewhere, their silhouettes dissolving in the light of the lanterns. Tracy looked at them and tried to remember the last time she herself was in a hurry somewhere. Not just going out for coffee or to the supermarket, but really living with the ease with which she ran around Brooklyn, laughed with her friends at the bar, danced to an old Rolling Stones song in their tiny apartment, where the wallpaper was peeling off in the corner. Now everything was different. Now she has a penthouse. Now she had the life she once dreamed of. Or isn't she? Tracy frowned, trying to catch the elusive thought. She was 34 and should have been happy. She had to thank fate for her husband, who rose from scratch, for this apartment, for a wardrobe full of dresses that she had not yet had time to wear. But instead of gratitude, she felt nothing, only the emptiness that grew every day like a shadow in the corner of the room. She turned away from the window and went to the kitchen. There, on the marble countertop, sat a bottle of red wine Cabernet from Napa, which Dave had brought back from his last business trip. He said it was something special, but they never opened it. Tracy took the bottle and turned it over in her hands, studying the label. Then she took the corkscrew out of the drawer and, without hesitation, pulled out the cork. The smell of wine tart, with notes of black currant, filled the air. She poured herself a glass, almost to the brim, and took a long sip. The wine burned my throat, but it was pleasant, at least some sensation, at least something real. "To you, Tracy Miller," she muttered, raising her glass in the empty kitchen. "For your ideal life." She walked back into the living room, carrying the glass with her, and turned on some music through the speaker Dave had installed last week. Something light, jazzy, filled the space, but the melody seemed alien, as if it belonged to someone else, not her. Tracy put the glass on the table and began to wander around the apartment, her fingers sliding along smooth surfaces, along the back of a chair, along a marble windowsill, along a glass closet door. She stopped at the door to Dave's office. He forbade her to go there without asking. "There are important papers there," he said, but now she didn't care. She pushed the door and entered. The room smelled of leather and wood. There were neatly folded folders on the table, and on the wall there was a photo of Dave and his colleagues, all in suits, smiling, with glasses in their hands. Tracy came closer, peering into his face. He looked happy, confidence, the same way he always was when he talked about work. She suddenly remembered how he told her about his first deal, back in Brooklyn. His eyes were shining, he was gesticulating, and she listened with bated breath, because she believed in him, in them. "Where are you now, Dave?" she whispered, touching the photo with her fingertips. "Where are we?" Her voice trembled, and she quickly turned away, feeling tears welling up in her eyes. She didn't want to cry. Not here, not now. She left the office, closed the door, and returned to the living room. The wine was still waiting for her on the table, and she took another sip, trying to clear the lump in her throat. The phone vibrated and Tracy jumped, nearly spilling her wine. She grabbed it, hoping to see a message from Dave, But it was her friend Lindsay, the one with whom she once spent nights chatting about everything under the sun. "Trace, how are you? I haven't seen you in ages. Let's have coffee this week," the message read. Tracy smiled, but the smile quickly faded. Lindsay lived in Brooklyn in their old neighborhood, and they went their separate ways when the Millers moved to Manhattan. Lindsay didn't understand this new life, not the penthouse, not the cocktail parties Tracy sometimes went to with the wives of Dave's colleagues. Tracy started to type an answer, but stopped. What could she write? "I miss you, but I'm different now. Come and look at my golden cage." She put the phone down without answering. Instead, she opened her laptop and turned on another TV series. The pictures flashed by, but she did not follow the plot. Her thoughts were somewhere far away in the past, in those days when she felt alive. She remembered how she and Dave walked around Brooklyn, how he bought her coffee at a small diner, how they laughed at his stupid jokes. Everything was simpler then. Then she did not feel like a shadow in her own life. The clock struck midnight, and Tracy realized that Dave probably wouldn't come. She finished her wine, put the glass in the dishwasher, and went into the bedroom. The bed was huge, with crisp white linens that smelled of lavender, but it felt cold without Dave. Tracy lay down without undressing and stared at the ceiling. Sirens were blaring in the distance, but the penthouse was quiet, too quiet. She closed her eyes, trying to sleep, but the lights of Manhattan were still standing before her eyes, indifferent and distant. Luxury surrounded her, but for the first time in a long time, Tracy realized that this luxury was not hers. This was Dave's dream, his victory. And she was simply part of the interior, a beautiful addition to his triumph. And this thought, so simple and so painful, haunted her until she finally fell into a restless sleep. The morning in the penthouse began with the smell of freshly brewed coffee. Tracy stood at the stove, idly stirring an omelet in a frying pan while the coffee machine hummed quietly, filling the kitchen with the aroma of espresso. She was wearing Dave's old t-shirt, the gray one with his college logo faded on it, and the soft shorts she only wore at home. Her hair was pulled back into a messy bun, with a few strands straying and falling onto her face. Outside the window, Manhattan was waking up. The first rays of the sun reflected from the glass facades of skyscrapers, turning the city into a golden mosaic. Dave appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed for work, dark blue suit, white shirt, tie tied in a perfect knot. He looked like he was ready to conquer the world, even though the clock only showed 7 in the morning. He was holding the phone in his hands, quickly scrolling through something on the screen, but when he noticed Tracy, he looked up and smiled. "Good morning, sleepyhead," he said, approaching her. His voice was cheerful, slightly hoarse from lack of sleep. "You got up early today." Tracy shrugged, not looking up from the frying pan. The omelet was already starting to burn around the edges, but she didn't care. "I couldn't sleep," she answered, putting food on a plate. "I decided to make you breakfast for once." "When did you get back yesterday?" "About 1. Dave took the cup of coffee she poured for him and took a sip. "The meeting dragged on, and then we still had to finish the report. You were already asleep and didn't want to wake you up." She nodded, placing the plate of omelet on the counter in front of him. Her movements were mechanical, as if she was performing a familiar ritual, but did not put her soul into it. Dave sat down in a high chair, put down his phone, and began eating with enthusiasm. "Listen, Trace," he began, swallowing the first bite. His eyes lit up, like those of a child who has been given a new toy. "I had a conversation with Harrison yesterday. Well, with the old man himself, can you imagine? He hinted that my name had come up at the council. Promotion to line manager is real, baby." "Really?" Tracy froze, holding her cup of coffee. She looked at him, trying to catch his delight, but something tightened inside her. She saw how he was shining, his face literally glowed with ambition, with this thirst that always moved him forward. She wanted to share his joy, but instead she only felt tired. "That's great, Dave," she said, forcing herself to smile. The smile came out weak, strained, but he didn't seem to notice. "You've wanted this for a long time." "Did you want to?" "Trace, I lived for this." He put down his fork and leaned across the counter towards her, his voice becoming louder, full of energy. If everything works out, it's not just a promotion. This is another level. More money, more influence. We can buy a house on Long Island if we want, or even go on vacation somewhere in the Caribbean, and not to this stupid campsite like last year. The camping was okay, she said quietly, looking down into her cup. The coffee was bitter, too strong, but she took another sip to hide her emotions. Dave laughed, leaning back in his chair. His laugh was loud, sincere, but there was something condescending in it. Well, yes, if you like sleeping in a tent and fighting off mosquitoes. Seriously, Trace, this is a chance to change everything. I work like hell for a reason. This is for us. She looked up, meeting his gaze. There was so much confidence, so much fire in his dark eyes, that she almost felt ashamed of her indifference. She should have been happy. She had to throw herself on his neck, kiss him, and tell him how proud she was. But instead, she just nodded. I know, she said. Well done. Dave frowned, noticing something in her tone. He leaned closer, resting his elbows on the counter. Hey, are you okay? You look like I told you I was going to a monastery, not about a promotion. Tracy forced her smile wider, waving her off with her free hand. It's okay, I just didn't get enough sleep. Really, I'm happy for you. This is great. He looked at her for another second, as if trying to decipher what was hidden behind her words, but then nodded and returned to his omelet. Okay, I'll believe it, he said with a slight grin. But you should see how I would look in the corner office. Overlooking the entire city, maybe even with a leather chair, like the big boss. You're already a big boss, she played along, but her voice sounded dull, without spark. She turned to the sink, starting to wash the frying pan so he couldn't see her face. Dave finished his breakfast in record time, finished his coffee, and stood up, straightening his tie. Listen, I'm leaving tonight, he said, approaching her from behind. Business trip to Chicago, 2 days. I need to meet with the client and sign a couple of papers. I'll be back on Friday and we'll celebrate, I promise. Tracy froze, her soapy hands hovering over the frying pan. She slowly turned to him, wiping her palms on a towel. Today? She asked again. You just returned yesterday. I know, he raised his hands as if in defense. But it's important, Trace. If I do everything right, this is another plus for my resume before the council. You understand, right? She understood. She always understood. But that didn't stop her chest from tightening from some dark, heavy feeling that she couldn't name. Of course, she said, looking away. Go. Good luck there. Dave stepped towards her, put his arm around her shoulders, and kissed the top of her head. His lips were warm, but she barely felt the touch. You're the best, he said, stepping back. I'll leave you a bottle of wine in the refrigerator. Relax in the evening. I'll call when I land. Okay, Tracy nodded, watching him grab his briefcase and walk towards the door. Bye. Bye, baby, he shouted from the corridor, and a second later the front door slammed, leaving her in silence. She stood in the middle of the kitchen, still holding a towel, and listened to the elevator hum behind the wall. Then she walked slowly to the refrigerator, opened the door, and took out a bottle of wine, the white Chardonnay he had bought last week. Her fingers squeezed the cold glass, and she suddenly felt tears burning her eyes. She didn't know why she wanted to cry because of his departure, because of his words about the promotion, or simply because he left her alone again. But the tears never fell. She brushed them away with the back of her hand, set the bottle on the counter, and took a deep breath. Well, she said to herself, her voice echoing off the walls, a holiday for one. She took a glass from the cabinet, poured some wine, and took a sip, looking out the window. The city lived its own life, and she stood here in this huge, luxurious apartment with a bottle of wine and loneliness, which became her only companions for the evening. And for the first time in a long time, it seemed to her that this life was not really hers. Tracy stood in front of the bedroom mirror, looking at her reflection. She was wearing a new workout outfit, high-waisted black leggings, and a hot pink top that showed off her slender figure. She bought this set yesterday in one of the boutiques on Madison Avenue, where she went just to look. The saleswoman, a young girl with perfect makeup, said that Tracy looked like an Instagram model in it, and Tracy, without hesitation, handed over her credit card. Now, looking at herself, she felt a slight trepidation, not that she doubted her choice, but just that she had not felt so noticeable for a long time. She ran her hand through her hair, pulled back into a high ponytail, and applied a little gloss to her lips. Today was her first day at the fitness club, which was located right downstairs in their building. Dave mentioned it during the move. They have the latest generation of exercise equipment and personal trainers. Trace, you'll love it. Then she just nodded, but after another night alone, with a glass of wine and endless scrolling of TV series, she decided that it was time to change something. She needed to leave this apartment, breathe in different air, and feel alive. She took the elevator down and entered the club through the glass doors. The hall was huge, mirrored walls, rows of exercise equipment, soft light pouring from hidden lamps. The air smelled of pine and something fresh, expensive, probably the fragrance that was sprayed here. Several people were already training. A man in the corner was lifting weights, two girls were doing stretches in front of the mirror, and a guy wearing headphones was running on the track. Tracy suddenly felt out of place, but then the administrator approached her, a tall brunette in a black uniform with an embroidered club logo. "Good morning. Are you new?" Her voice was warm, with a slight hoarseness, and her smile was such that Tracy immediately relaxed. "Yes, the first time," she answered, adjusting the strap of her bag on her shoulder. "I'm Tracy. I live upstairs." "Oh, great. Welcome, Tracy." The brunette extended her hand. "I'm Leela, manager. Let me show you everything, and then introduce you to the coach, if you want." Tracy nodded, and Leela led her around the room, telling her about the cardio and strength training areas and the yoga studio overlooking the city. Her energy was contagious, and Tracy found herself smiling sincerely for the first time in days. When they reached the smoothie bar, Leela stopped and nodded towards a group of people sitting at a table. "And here are our regulars," she said, lowering her voice. "Fashionable party. They come here not only to train, but also to hang out. Do you want me to introduce you?" Tracy hesitated, but curiosity prevailed. She nodded, and Leela led her to the table. There were three people sitting there, two girls and a guy. One of the girls, with short brown hair and a tattoo on her wrist, looked up from her phone and smiled. "Leela, who did you bring?" she asked, her voice low and slightly mocking. "This is Tracy, the new girl," Leela winked. "Tracy, this is Kate, our local star. And this is Sophie and Jake." Sophie, a blonde with perfectly styled curls, waved, and Jake, a guy with light stubble and a tight t-shirt, nodded, looking Tracy up and down. "Hi, Tracy," Kate said, pushing back her chair. "Sit down with us." "Where are you from?" "I live here in the penthouse," Tracy answered, sitting down. She felt a little awkward, but their relaxed smiles and casual manner of speaking were reassuring. "Wow, penthouse." Sophie raised her eyebrows. "Seriously? Are you a model or someone's trophy wife?" Tracy laughed, shaking her head. "No, it's just. My husband works in finance. We recently moved." "Finance is cool," Jake said, leaning toward her. His voice was deep, with a slight accent, British perhaps, and he smelled like mint gum. "What do you do yourself?" "Nothing yet," Tracy admitted, feeling her cheeks begin to burn. "Moving, you know, all that. I think I'll find something." "You'll find it," Kate patted her on the shoulder. "In the meantime, come here. We usually chat here after training and drink smoothies. Sometimes we go to the bar across the street. Are you with us?" "Maybe," Tracy smiled, feeling the warmth spreading in her chest. She liked the way they looked at her, not as Dave's wife, not as a shadow in his life, but as a person, at herself. After the workout, a light one with a trainer who showed her the basics, Tracy rejoined Kate, Sophie, and Jake. They chatted about everything, about a new club in Soho, about how Sophie once spilled a cocktail on some famous DJ, about how Jake hates treadmills but still runs to stay in shape. Tracy laughed, interjected her remarks, and with every minute she felt how the tension of the last weeks was letting go of her. Listen, Tracy, you have great style, Kate said as they left the club. These leggings are on fire. Where did you get it? Madison, yesterday, Tracy replied, adjusting her bag. I just came in and came out with a bunch of things. Oh, is shopping your thing? Sophie clapped her hands. Then you're definitely ours. Let's go together tomorrow. I know a couple of places where you can find something cool. Go ahead, Tracy nodded without hesitation. She suddenly wanted to say yes to everything these people, their energy, their lives. The next day she met Sophie at the center and shopping became her new ritual. They went into boutiques, tried on dresses, and laughed at overly pretentious bags. Tracy bought a leather jacket that she would have previously said was too expensive and a pair of heels that Kate called killer. Her wardrobe was replenished with designer items Gucci, Prada, names that were previously just words from magazines. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw not just Tracy, Dave's wife, but the woman being looked at. In the evening, returning home with bags, she laid out her purchases on the bed. Dave was still in Chicago, and the apartment seemed even quieter than usual. Tracy put on a new dress, black, tight, with a deep neckline, and stood in front of the mirror. Her reflection looked at her defiantly, with a slight smile. She turned around, feeling the fabric slide over her skin, and suddenly caught herself thinking. She liked the way they looked at her. Love how Jake held his gaze a little longer than necessary as she left the club. I love how Kate called her hers, and how Sophie admired her taste. She took out her phone and took a selfie in the mirror, sending it to Sophie with the caption, "Getting ready for the weekend." Sophie replied almost immediately, "Bombshell, come out with us tomorrow, it will be fun." Tracy smiled, feeling something new ignite inside her, not just a desire to please or fill a void, but a thirst to live the way she wants. She didn't know where it would lead her, but in that moment, standing in front of the mirror in her new dress, Tracy knew she needed more. More looks, more laughter, more life. And she was going to take it. Dave sat in the corner of the conference room, tapping his pen on a pad, while his colleague, Mike, finished his presentation on quarterly forecasts. The hall was filled with the hum of voices and the rustling of papers, but Dave barely listened. His thoughts were somewhere in Chicago in a morning meeting with a client, where he managed to close a deal for $7 million. It was his triumph, another step towards the promotion he had dreamed of. He could already imagine how he would tell Tracy, how they would sit down to dinner, open a bottle of wine, and laugh like old times. But something about the picture seemed fuzzy, as if he was trying to remember a dream rather than reality. The meeting ended, and colleagues headed for the exit, talking about plans for the evening. Dave gathered his things and headed for the elevator when Mike, a stocky guy with wild hair who always knew the latest gossip in the office, called out to him. "Hey Miller, are you going to the Blue Bar today?" Mike caught up with him, straightening his tie. "The guys gather there after work. Let's relax, let's skip a couple." Dave shook his head, stuffing the notebook into his briefcase. "Not today, Mike. Just from Chicago, I want to go home. Tracy is waiting." Mike grinned, slapping him on the shoulder. "Well, yes, of course. Penthouse, wife, everything. Although, I saw Tracy a couple of days ago. She didn't look like she was sitting at home waiting." Dave stopped, his hand hovering on the elevator button. He turned to Mike, frowning. "What do you mean?" Mike shrugged, clearly not expecting such a reaction. His tone became a little more cautious, but a spark of curiosity flashed in his eyes. "Nothing like that, relax. Just walked into the Luna on the corner Wednesday night, and she was there. With some guy, they chatted and laughed. I thought maybe you knew." Dave felt something clench inside him, not pain, not anger, but something cold, sharp, like the prick of a needle. He forced himself to smile, although the corners of his lips barely twitched. "With a guy?" he asked, trying to keep his voice even. "Who was it?" "No idea." Mike raised his hands as if defensively. "Just an acquaintance, probably. So tall, in a leather jacket. They were sitting at the bar, nothing special. I just saw it and thought she was having fun while you were on a business trip." "Having fun," Dave repeated, and the word sounded heavier than he intended. He pressed the elevator button, looking at his reflection in the metal doors. "Okay, Mike, see you tomorrow." "Hey, what are you doing?" Mike stepped closer. His voice became more serious. "I didn't mean to say anything like that. Just a word to say, Tracy is great, you know." "I know," Dave snapped, entering the elevator. The doors closed, cutting him off from Mike, and he was left alone in the cramped cabin, feeling his pulse beating in his temples. He took out his phone and opened a chat with Tracy. The last message from her was yesterday. "It's boring without you, come back soon." Nothing unusual, nothing to worry about. But Mike's words were playing in my head like a broken record. "With some guy." We were chatting and laughing. He dialed her number, not giving himself time to change his mind. The phone buzzed for several seconds, and Dave already thought that she would not answer. But finally, he heard her voice light, slightly out of breath, as if she had just entered the apartment. "Hi," Tracy said. "Are you home already?" "No, I just left the office." He tried to speak calmly, but his fingers gripped the phone tighter. "How are you? What are you doing?" "Yes, nothing special." Her voice was soft, but there was some kind of detachment in it. "I went to the club in the morning, then walked." "How are you? Did Chicago go well?" "Yes, everything is fine." He paused, choosing his words. "Listen, Trace. Mike said he saw you at Luna on Wednesday. With someone. This is true." There was silence on the other end of the line, not long, just a couple of seconds, but enough for Dave to feel his stomach tighten. Then she laughed shortly, almost casually. "Seriously, is Mike gossiping now?" Her tone was light, but a note of irritation slipped through it. "Yes, I was there with friends from the fitness club. Kate, Sophie, a couple more people. No big deal, just had a cocktail. You don't mind me going out while you're traveling, do you?" "No, of course," he said, but the words sounded harsher than he intended. "It's just, Mike said you were with some guy, one-on-one." "Jesus, Dave," she sighed, and he could almost see her rolling her eyes. "It was Jake. He's from our crowd. We were all sitting together. He was just nearby when Mike apparently passed by. Are you really going to question me because I had a martini with my friends?" Dave clenched his jaw, feeling irritation mixed with relief. Her explanation sounded logical, too logical, as if she knew what to say in advance. But he didn't want to dig deeper, not now, not over the phone. "I'm not conducting an interrogation," he said, softening his tone. "I just asked. I don't want you to think that I don't trust you." "It's okay, don't worry," she answered, but her voice was colder than a minute ago. "I'm tired, I want to take a shower. Will you call when you're home?" "Yes, of course," he nodded, although she could not see it. "Rest." "Bye," she said and hung up. Dave lowered the phone, looking at the screen where her name was still glowing. He stood in the middle of the sidewalk, a crowd flowing around him, people rushing home, to bars, to their lives, and he felt as if someone had snatched a piece of reality from him. He trusted Tracy, always trusted, but that coldness in her voice, that ease with which she dismissed his question, left a thorn in him. Who is Jake? Why didn't she mention him earlier? And why did Mike look at him as if he knew more than he said? He put the phone in his pocket and walked towards the subway, but his thoughts did not let go. He sat in the carriage, looking into emptiness, while the faces of strangers flashed before his eyes. He remembered Tracy, her laugh, her soft hair, her habit of falling asleep buried in his shoulder. She was his anchor, his home, even when everything went wrong. But now, in this new world where he was building their future, she seemed different. Or is it he himself who has changed? When he entered the penthouse, it was already dark. The apartment greeted him with silence. Tracy had left a note on the kitchen counter. "Gone to Sophie's, will be back late." Dave read it twice, feeling the thorn in his chest grow deeper. He took a beer from the refrigerator, sat down on the sofa, and turned on the TV, but did not look at the screen. Instead, he thought about Luna, about the guy in the leather jacket, about Tracy's laugh that might no longer be his. Dave pushed open the penthouse door, leaving his duffel bag at the entrance. His suit, the same dark blue that he had worn in Chicago, was wrinkled after the long flight, and shadows of fatigue lay under his eyes. He had just returned from another business trip, this time from Boston, where he met with clients for 3 days in a row, drank coffee on the go, and slept 4 hours a night. But the deal was closed, another plus on his resume before the board. He expected to be greeted warmly at home, the smell of dinner, Tracy's voice, her smile. Instead, he was greeted with silence, broken only by the low hum of the air conditioner. "Trace?" he shouted, taking off his jacket and throwing it on the back of the sofa. There was no answer. He walked into the kitchen, noticing an empty bottle of wine on the counter and a lone glass with her lipstick imprint on the rim. The phone lay nearby. The screen was glowing. Apparently, she had forgotten it in a hurry. Dave took it in his hands, not intending to dig, but the notification itself popped up. "Kate, where are you?" "We're already in the shadow, waiting." He frowned, put the phone back, and went into the bedroom. The bed was unmade, her jeans and top were lying on the floor, and the light scent of her perfume was in the air, vanilla with something tart. He took out his phone and dialed her number. The beeps went on for a long time, and he already thought that she wouldn't answer, but finally he heard her voice a little louder than usual, with a background of music and laughter. "Hello, are you back?" she said, shouting over the noise. "Yes, just now." He leaned against the door frame, looking at the empty bed. "Where are you?" "Oh, I'm with the guys at a place on the Lower East Side." Her words sounded casual, as if it didn't matter. "You don't mind, do you? I thought you would arrive later." "I wrote to you that the flight was postponed." His voice became a little sharper. "What kind of place?" "Shadow, some bar." Kate said it's fun here. She laughed, but the laugh was short, forced. "Listen, it's noisy here. I can't hear you well. Let's talk tomorrow." Dave squeezed the phone tighter, feeling the irritation rise in his chest. "Trace, I just got off the plane. I wanted to see you." "I know, I'm sorry." A note of guilt flashed in her voice, but immediately disappeared. "I won't be back too late, okay? Rest for now." "Okay," he muttered and hung up the call without waiting for her answer. He threw the phone on the bed and walked into the living room, opening the refrigerator. It was empty except for a couple of yogurts and a bottle of beer. He took the beer, ripped off the cap, and took a long sip, trying to push away the fatigue and that strange, sticky aftertaste that had left their conversation. He collapsed on the sofa, took out his laptop, and opened Instagram, not because he wanted to spy, but just to keep his head occupied. But her profile popped up in the feed. The last post was uploaded an hour ago. Tracy in a tight black dress, with a cocktail in her hand, standing next to Kate and some guy tall, with dark hair, in a leather jacket. The caption read, "The night calls." In the next story, she was laughing, dancing under the neon lights, and unfamiliar faces flashed behind her, fashionable, relaxed, with cigarettes and glasses. This was not their world, not the one he knew. Dave slammed his laptop shut, feeling everything boil inside. He remembered their conversation a week ago after Mike's words about moon. Then she waved it off, and he believed or forced himself to believe. But now, looking at these photos, at her smile, which seemed so alien, he could not get rid of a shadow of doubt. She moves away. Not just physically, with these parties and new friends, but as if he was going somewhere where he couldn't catch up with her. When she returned, it was already after midnight. Dave heard the key click in the lock and stood up from the couch, where he had dozed off with a beer bottle in his hand. Tracy came in, kicking off her shoes at the threshold. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes were shining either from alcohol or from adrenaline. "Oh, you're not sleeping," she said, throwing her purse on the table. "How was the trip?" "Okay," he stepped towards her, crossing his arms. "Where have you been?" "I told you, in the shadow." She walked past him into the kitchen, pouring herself some water from the tap. "It was cool there. Live music, dancing. You wouldn't like it, it's too noisy." "I called you." His voice became lower, sharper. "You could have at least warned me that you would leave." Tracy turned around, glass in hand. Her eyebrows raised as if he had said something unexpected. "Dave, I'm not a child. You're always traveling. Should I sit at home and knit?" "I'm not saying that you should stay at home." He stepped closer, feeling the tension growing. but you could have answered normally rather than brushing it off. I arrive, but you are not there. And these photos of you on Instagram, who are all these people? Friends, she shrugged, taking a sip of water. Kate, Sophie, Jake. I told you about them. What's wrong? It's not like I find out about your life from social networks. He raised his voice without holding back. You're hanging around some dubious bars somewhere, and I don't even know who you're with. Doubtful. She placed the glass on the counter with a loud thud. This is Manhattan, Dave, not a back alley. And I'm not wobbling, I'm living. You are always in your offices and planes, and I am here alone. What should I do? Stare at the ceiling and wait for you to remember me. I work for us, Trace. He hit the back of the chair with his fist, and the sound echoed throughout the room. For the sake of this house, for the sake of everything we have. And you. What am I? She interrupted, stepping towards him. Her eyes flashed with anger. Am I having fun? Am I breathing? Do you want me to be your ideal wife who sits and nods while you build your empire? Sorry, but I can't do this. They fell silent, looking at each other. The air between them was heavy, like before a thunderstorm. Dave saw something new in her face, not just fatigue or irritation, but challenge. She did not retreat as before, did not try to smooth out the corners, and he didn't know what to say. His anger mixed with confusion, and he turned away, rubbing his neck. Okay, he finally managed. Do what you want. I'm going to sleep. Good night, she said, going into the bedroom. The door slammed behind her, and Dave was left alone in the living room, listening to the silence fill the house again. He lay down on the sofa without undressing and closed his eyes. But sleep did not come. Her stories flashed before her eyes: cocktails, neon lights, this guy in a leather jacket. Their conversations became shorter, sharper, like threads cut with scissors. And for the first time in a long time, Dave thought that maybe he was wasting not only her time, but also her. Dave stood in the cramped elevator car, clutching a bouquet of roses bright red, with droplets of water on the petals, which he had bought at the Boston airport half an hour before boarding. He decided to return a day early, canceling his last client appointment to surprise Tracy. In recent weeks, something heavy had hung between them, invisible but palpable, like smog over the city. Their fight before he left had left a bitter taste, and he wanted to make up for it not with words, but with action. Flowers, dinner, maybe even dancing to an old record like they did in Brooklyn. He imagined her face, her surprised smile, and it warmed him all the way home. The plane landed at JFK at 6 in the evening, and Dave, without stopping at the office, took a taxi directly to Manhattan. In the car, he checked his phone. Tracy had not texted since the morning, only a short, "Have a nice day," in response to his message about the meeting. He did not warn her about his return. He wanted it to be a surprise. Plans were spinning in her head. Order food from her favorite Italian restaurant, open a bottle of the Cabernet he brought from Napa. Talk. Not about work, not about her parties, but about them. About what happened before the Penthouse, before his endless trips. The taxi stopped at their building, and Dave paid the driver and entered the lobby. The concierge nodded at him with a familiar smile, and he stepped into the elevator, feeling a slight trepidation. The bouquet in his hands trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from anticipation. He imagined how Tracy would open the door, how her eyes would light up, how she would throw herself around his neck. Maybe they'd even laugh at how he tried to hide the flowers behind his back. This was his chance to get back something he had begun to lose. The elevator stopped at their floor with a quiet ding, and Dave stepped out into the hallway. The key turned in the lock with a soft click, and he pushed the door open, crossing the threshold. The apartment was dark. Only a faint light came from the living room. A table lamp was burning there, casting long shadows on the walls. The air was warm, thick, saturated with something unfamiliar, not her vanilla perfume, but something sharp, masculine, with notes of sandalwood and tobacco. Dave froze, his fingers gripping the stems of the roses until the thorns dug into his skin. "Trace," he called, taking a step forward. His voice sounded more muffled than he expected, as if it had disappeared into this strange silence. She emerged from the kitchen a second later, and Dave felt his heart skip a beat. Tracy was in a black dress, the same one from her stories, tight-fitting, with a neckline that he had not seen on her before at home. Her hair was disheveled, blonde strands fell on her face, and her cheeks were alight with a blush. She was holding a rag in her hands as if she had just wiped something, and her eyes widened when she saw him. Dave, her voice trembled, and she froze, looking at him as if he were a ghost. You, what are you doing here? I decided to come back earlier. He raised the bouquet, trying to smile, but the smile came out crooked, strained. I wanted to surprise you. Tracy blinked, her fingers tightening on the rag, and she took a step towards him, but stopped halfway. Oh, that's great, she said, her voice too high, too fast. I didn't know. You said you'd be back tomorrow. Yes, I canceled the meeting. He stepped into the living room, and then his gaze fell on the coffee table. Two glasses of wine stood side by side, one almost empty, with red lipstick marks on the rim, the other half full, with light fingerprints. The air around them was saturated with the same alien smell, and Dave felt everything inside him shrink. What is this? Tracy followed his gaze, and her face paled. She tossed the rag onto the counter and walked over to the table, grabbing the empty glass as if she could hide it in one motion. It's nothing, she said, turning towards the kitchen. I was just drinking wine, the second glass. I didn't put it away, I forgot. Two glasses. Dave stepped closer. His voice became lower, harder. He placed the flowers on the sofa, not taking his eyes off her. Trace, what's going on? Nothing is happening, she turned to him, her hands shaking as she put the glass in the sink. Lord, Dave, you came back earlier. I didn't expect it. That's all. You scared me. He looked at her disheveled hair, at her bare feet, at this dress that screamed about something more than just an evening at home. The smell in the air was too strong, too foreign, and he couldn't ignore it. His gaze darted to the front door. It was slightly open, as if someone had just left without closing it completely. Someone was here, he said, and it wasn't a question. His heart was beating so loudly that he could barely hear his own words. Tracy, who was here? There was no one. She crossed her arms over her chest, her voice becoming harsher. You're making it up, Dave. I was alone, drinking wine, watching a TV series. This is all. With two glasses, he stepped towards her, his fingers clenched into fists. And this smell, what is it? Don't tell me it's your perfume. Tracy opened her mouth to answer, but fell silent, her eyes darting around the room as if looking for a way out. She took a step back, resting her back against the counter, and her breathing became faster. This is from the candle, she finally said, pointing to the coffee table where there was nothing. I lit a candle, you probably feel it. Candle, he repeated, and his voice mixed with sarcasm and pain. He walked over to the table, took the second glass, and held it up to the light. The fingerprints were larger than hers, with clear lines, and there was still wine splashing at the bottom. Are you serious, Trace? Do you think I'm blind? Stop it. She snatched the glass from his hands. Her movements were sharp, almost panicky. You burst in here, start interrogating, and I'm not even ready to see you. What do you want from me? The truth, he raised his voice, feeling how everything inside was torn. I come home with flowers, and there are two glasses. You're in this dress, and it stinks as if someone else was here. Who is he, Tracy? There was no one, she shouted back, her eyes flashing with anger and something else, fear. You're paranoid, Dave. You're always on your trips, and I have to sit and wait like a dog. I live, you know. I'm breathing. Who are you breathing with? He stepped so close to her that he could feel the warmth of her body. Tell me who just left. I saw the door closing. Tracy froze, her lips trembled, but she quickly pulled herself together. You didn't see anything, she said, looking away. It's probably the wind. The window is open. Dave turned to the windows. All were closed, not a hint of a draft. He turned back, his gaze hard as stone. Don't lie to me, he said quietly, and there was more pain in his voice than anger. Just tell the truth. She was silent, looking somewhere at the floor. Her fingers fiddled with the hem of her dress, and a silence hung in the room so thick that it seemed as if it could be cut with a knife. Dave waited, feeling how time stretched on endlessly, how every breath she took cut him from the inside. But she didn't answer. She just stood there with her head down, and this silent refusal was worse than any words. He stepped back, his shoulders slumping. The bouquet lay on the sofa. Red petals had already begun to fall onto the gray skin. He looked at her again, at her disheveled hair, at her trembling hands, at those two glasses that screamed about what he didn't want to see. And suddenly I realized that I couldn't stay here any longer. "I'll go," he said, his voice hoarse and foreign. "We'll talk later." "Dave, wait." She stepped towards him, but he had already turned to the door. Her voice broke, but he didn't stop. He walked out into the corridor, slamming the door, and went downstairs without looking back. The flowers remained lying on the sofa, and two glasses stood on the table, as silent witnesses to what had just happened. Dave stood in the middle of the living room, his chest heaving with heavy breathing, and Tracy's words still ringing in his ears. "You're paranoid, Dave." He looked at her disheveled hair, at her trembling hands clutching the glass that she had snatched from him, and felt everything boiling inside. Two glasses of wine on the table, the smell of someone else's perfume, her ridiculous excuses, all this added up to a picture that he did not want to see, but could not ignore. The bouquet of roses he had brought to surprise her lay on the sofa, its red petals the only bright spot in a room full of shadows. "Do you think I'm a fool?" His voice broke into a scream, and he stepped towards her, clenching his fists. "Two glasses, Tracy, two. And that smell, do you seriously think I'm going to believe your nonsense about the candle?" Tracy stepped back, her back against the kitchen counter, and she threw the glass into the sink with such force that it cracked. Her eyes flashed, a mixture of anger and panic, and she sat up straight, looking at him defiantly. "What's wrong with you, Dave?" she shouted back, her voice trembling, but it was loud, sharp. "You burst in here like a detective and start blaming me for everything. I don't have to justify myself to you for every step I take. Don't you have to?" He hit the counter with his palm, and the sound echoed throughout the room. "I came home with flowers, and there was someone here, Tracy. Someone drank wine with you while I was in Boston closing deals for us. And you stand here, lying to my face." "I'm not lying." Her voice broke into a squeal, and she stepped towards him, her face red with rage. "There was no one. How many times do I have to repeat this? It's you who came up with some story for yourself because you can't stand that I live without you." Dave froze, her words hitting him like a slap in the face. He looked at her, at this woman whom he had loved for 8 years, with whom he shared everything from cheap apartments to this penthouse, and did not recognize her. Her blue eyes, which he once called his sky, were now cold alien. He took a step towards the table, grabbed the second glass, and lifted it, showing her his fingerprints on the glass. "Are these your footprints?" He almost growled, his voice trembling with tension. "Look, Tracy, these are not your fingers. Whose are they? Tell me, whose?" She turned away, her hands trembling, and she pressed them to her chest, as if trying to steady herself. "You're unbearable," she whispered, but her voice no longer had the same confidence. "You just want to find something that isn't there." "No." He threw the glass on the floor, and the glass shattered into pieces, ringing on the marble. "Then explain it to me. Explain why it stinks like a men's locker room, why the door was open, why you're standing here in this dress like you just came from a party." Tracy flinched at the sound of breaking glass, her eyes filled with tears, but she immediately brushed them away with the back of her hand. "Stop screaming." She stepped towards him, her voice breaking into tears. "You don't understand, Dave. You are never here. You are always out there somewhere, in your offices, on your planes, and I'm alone, you know. Alone in this damn apartment that looks more like a museum than a home, and this is an excuse." He grabbed a chair that stood at the counter and turned it over with force. The wood hit the floor with a loud crack, and Tracy screamed, stepping back. "You're alone, so what? Is this a reason to drag someone here while I work for us?" "I didn't drag anyone." She shouted so loudly that her voice echoed off the walls. Tears streamed down her cheeks, leaving dark trails of mascara. but she made no attempt to hide them. "You're not listening to me, Dave. You never listen. I'm just tired of being your shadow." He froze, looking at her. Her words hung in the air, heavy as a hammer blow. Tired of being his shadow. He felt the anger inside him mixing with something else, pain, fear, confusion. He wanted to grab her by the shoulders, shake her, force her to tell the truth, but instead he turned and walked into the bedroom, his steps sharp and heavy. "Where are you going?" Her voice caught up with him, full of panic. She rushed after him, her bare feet slapping on the marble. "I'm not staying here." He opened the closet, pulled out a suitcase, and threw it on the bed. His hands moved quickly, almost mechanically. He grabbed shirts, trousers, threw them inside without looking. "I won't stay with someone who lies to me." "Dave, no." Tracy ran up to him, her voice breaking into a sob. She grabbed his sleeve, her fingers clutching the fabric of his jacket. "Please listen to me. I'm not lying, I swear. It's not what you think." He turned sharply towards her, snatching his hand from her grip. Her tears, her pleading look, it was too much. He felt like something inside him was tearing, like the thin thread that held them together was breaking under the pressure. "Isn't that right?" he shouted, his face inches from hers. "Then how, Tracy? Explain to me how this is wrong. 2 glasses, you in this dress, the smell, and you want me to believe that no one was here?" It was. It was Jake. She blurted out the name, her voice shaking, and she immediately bit her lip, as if she regretted what she had said. "He came in for a while, we drank a glass, and he left." "That's it, Dave, I swear." "Jake," he repeated the name, and it burned his tongue like acid. "The same Jake from your parties, the one you were just chatting with in Luna, and you call him here while I'm on a business trip. It's not what you think." She grabbed his hand again, her tears dripping onto the floor. "He's just a friend, Dave. We talked, laughed, and he left. Nothing happened. Please believe me." "Should I believe you?" He pulled out of her grip, his voice became quieter, but there was more pain in it than anger. "I come home, and there he is." "You're lying to my face, Tracy. How can I trust you after this?" "Because I love you," she shouted, her voice breaking the silence like a shot. She fell to her knees in front of him, her hands clinging to his pants, her face wet with tears. "Dave, please don't go. I didn't mean for this to happen. I just wanted to feel alive." He looked down at her tear-stained face, at her trembling shoulders, at her despair. And for the first time in all these years, he didn't know what to do. His anger fought with love, his pain with a desire to hug her, to tell her that everything would be fine. But he couldn't. Not now. Not after this. "I can't," he said, his voice hoarse, almost a whisper. He zipped up his suitcase, picked it up from the bed, and walked to the door. "I need to leave." "Dave!" She jumped up and rushed after him, her hands again grabbing his sleeve. "Don't go, please. We can talk. I'll explain everything." He stopped at the threshold, feeling her fingers trembling on his hand. He turned to her, his eyes meeting hers, and for a second he thought he was going to give up. But then he remembered those glasses, that smell, her lie, and pulled his hand out, stronger than he wanted. "That's enough," he said, opening the door. "I'll come back when I figure it out. But not today." She shouted something after her, but he had already stepped into the corridor, slamming the door. Her voice faded behind the wall, and he walked towards the elevator, clutching the handle of his suitcase until his knuckles turned white. Downstairs, he stepped outside. The cold air hit his face, but he didn't stop. He didn't know where he was going, to a hotel, to a friend, just away from here. But he knew one thing. This quarrel was not just a peak. It was a rift, and he wasn't sure if they could cross it. Dave sat on the edge of the narrow bed in the hotel room, looking at the dim light of the street lamps filtering through the thin curtains. The room was featureless beige walls, cheap carpet, a TV that he didn't even turn on. His suitcase sat by the door, still unpacked, and his jacket hung over the back of his chair, still smelling of the airport and the roses he'd left in the penthouse. He ran his hand over his face, feeling the stubble on his chin, and tried to remember the last time he slept for more than 4 hours. But his thoughts were confused, returning to one thing, to Tracy, to her tear-stained face, to 2 glasses on the table, to her words that cut him like a knife. He left the apartment a few hours ago, after that fight that still echoed in his head. Her scream, her tears, her "I love you," all of it was too much to stay, but too painful to forget. He didn't know what to do next, but he couldn't sit in that living room, soaked in someone else's perfume. That's why he found himself here, in this soulless hotel in the middle of Manhattan, where even the silence seemed hostile. Dave took out his phone and opened their correspondence. The last message from Tracy was sent an hour ago. "Please come back. We need to talk." He read it 3 times, feeling his fingers tighten around the phone. Answer, call. He imagined her voice soft, pleading, like when she clung to his sleeve. But then I remembered her lie, it was Jake, and the anger flared again, drowning out everything else. He threw the phone on the bed and stood up, walking towards the window. Behind the glass, Manhattan sparkled as always, but now this shine seemed cold, indifferent to him. He worked for this city, for their life in it, for her. And she, what did she do? Drinking wine with some Jake while he was closing deals in Boston, dancing in shady bars while he dreamed about their future. He clenched his fists, feeling his nails dig into his palms. It was a betrayal not only of his trust, but of everything he had built. He returned to the bed, grabbed the phone, and dialed the number of his friend Tom, a lawyer with whom he had once studied in college. Tom answered after the second ring, his voice sleepy but cheerful. "Dave, why are you calling at midnight? Everything is fine." "No, it's not okay," Dave spoke quietly, but his voice trembled with suppressed anger. "I need advice about the divorce." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Dave heard Tom cough, apparently sitting up in bed. "Divorce? Seriously?" Tom lowered his voice, as if he was afraid that someone would overhear. "What happened, old man? You and Tracy. I thought you were perfect." "Nothing is perfect." Dave walked to the window, looking at the city lights. "I returned home today, and there. She was not alone. 2 glasses of wine, the smell of someone else's perfume. She's lying to me, Tom. Right in the face." "Damn," Tom exhaled. "You are sure? Maybe this is a misunderstanding. Tracy doesn't look like that." "I thought so too," Dave smiled bitterly. "But I saw what I saw. I can't live with this. Just tell me what to do." Tom paused, then spoke in a businesslike tone, as if he had switched to lawyer mode. "Okay, if you're serious, the first thing you need to do is gather information. Evidence, if any. Then file a claim in New York. It's not difficult, but it can be a pain, especially if she wants to challenge it. Do you have a prenuptial agreement?" "No," Dave shook his head, feeling everything shrink inside him. "We got married without this. They thought it didn't matter." "Okay, then it will be more difficult," Tom sighed. "Look, I can start tomorrow, but are you sure? Divorce is not just a piece of paper, it is a war. Especially with the apartment, bills, all this. Maybe you can try to talk." "I tried." Dave clenched his jaw. "She's lying. I can't trust her." "Okay," Tom paused. "We'll meet tomorrow morning and discuss the details. In the meantime, try to get some sleep, okay? Don't make decisions rashly." "Thank you," Dave muttered and hung up the call. Sleep. He couldn't even sit still. He lay down on the bed, looking at the ceiling, but those glasses, her disheveled hair, "it was Jake" flashed before his eyes. He didn't know what hurt more, her lie or the fact that he still loved her despite it. Meanwhile, Tracy was sitting on the living room floor, leaning her back against the sofa. In front of her lay the fragments of a glass that Dave had broken during an argument. She didn't remove them, she didn't have the strength. Her eyes were red from crying, and her hands were still shaking, although she was no longer crying. The apartment seemed huge, empty, like a cave, where every sound her breathing, the creaking of the floor, the distant roar of the city only intensified the feeling of loneliness. She looked at the fragments, and each of them was like a piece of her life, which was crumbling right before her eyes. She didn't want it to end like this. I didn't want him to leave, slamming the door, so that he would look at her as if she were a stranger. But he had left, and now she sat here, in this penthouse that had never felt like home, trying to understand how they got to this point. Jake. This name burned her from the inside like coal. She wasn't lying, not entirely. He actually came in for a while, brought a bottle of wine, they chatted and laughed. But she didn't tell Dave the whole truth about the way Jake looked at her, how his hand lingered on her shoulder a little longer than necessary, how she felt wanted, alive, for the first time in months. There was nothing he left when she asked, but this moment, this brief moment when she allowed herself to forget about Dave, now destroyed everything. She stood up, her legs numb from sitting for a long time, and walked to the table, where the bouquet of roses still lay. Their petals began to fall off, and she ran her fingers through the soft buds, feeling the tears welling up again. He brought flowers. He returned early to surprise her, and she failed him. Not cheating, but something worse. She had allowed the crack between them to become an abyss. Tracy took the phone, opened their correspondence, and wrote, "Please come back. We need to talk." But he didn't answer. She waited, looking at the screen, until the numbers on the clock changed from midnight to 1 in the morning. Then she threw the phone on the sofa and went into the bedroom. Without undressing, she lay down on the bed, which still smelled of his cologne. She closed her eyes, but sleep did not come. Instead, she saw his face, his anger, his pain, his departure, and she understood that everything was falling apart, and she didn't know how to stop it. Dave was sitting at a table in the corner of a coffee shop on the corner of Fifth Avenue, across from Tom, who was laying out a stack of papers in front of him. The morning was gray, the rain pattered on the windows, leaving streaks on the glass, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the dampness that soaked his coat. He stayed up all night in the hotel, tossing and turning, looking at the ceiling, replaying the fight with Tracy over and over in his head. Now, with a cup of espresso in his hands, he felt no better. Fatigue weighed on his shoulders, and anger still smoldered somewhere inside, like coals that did not go out. Tom, in his sharp gray suit, looked collected, although his eyes betrayed a slight concern. He pushed the first sheet of paper toward Dave, a draft of the divorce petition. "Here's the basic plan," Tom said, tapping his pen on the paper. "We file for divorce without indicating fault. It's easier in New York. But property, this will be more complicated. The penthouse is in your name, right?" "Yes," Dave nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. His voice was hoarse, as if he had not spoken for several hours. "I signed the contract. I paid the mortgage. It's all on me." "Great," Tom made a note in his notebook. "Then we can declare that the apartment remains yours." "Did she contribute anything to the purchase?" "No," Dave shook his head, looking into his cup. "She hasn't worked for the last couple of years. Everything went through me." "Then this is our trump card." Tom leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "But she can demand a share. Without a prenuptial agreement, the court will divide the assets equitably. Considering her contribution to the marriage, emotional every day, all that she can lay claim to something." "For something?" Dave looked up, his eyebrows furrowed. "Tom, I worked hard for this place. Every dollar is mine. She just lived there." "I understand." Tom raised his hand, calming him. "But courts love drama. She can say that she supported you while you built your career. We will dispute this, but prepare for a fight." Dave clenched his jaw, feeling his anger rise again. He imagined Tracy in the penthouse, their penthouse, which he had chosen, paid for, furnished. And now she could take some of it back. After everything he'd seen, the glasses, her lies, her Jake, he slammed his cup on the table, slightly spilling the coffee. "The apartment is mine," he said, his voice becoming firmer. "I won't give her a single meter. Let him take his clothes and leave." Tom nodded, writing something down on his notepad. "Okay, we'll say so. I will prepare the documents by tomorrow. But Dave, be prepared, she won't give up without a scandal." "Let him try," Dave muttered, looking away to the window. He had already seen this scandal in her eyes last night, her tears, her screams. But now it wasn't just personal. It was a war. Tracy stood at the huge window in the living room, looking out over wet Manhattan. Rain flowed down the glass, blurring the lights of the skyscrapers, and she felt the cold from the window penetrate her skin. She was wearing Dave's old sweater, the one she'd worn in Brooklyn when they first started, and jeans, but even in those clothes, she felt like a stranger in the apartment. Her phone lay on the table, the screen flickering with missed calls: Kate, Sophie, even Lindsay from Brooklyn, but she didn't answer anyone. Her gaze fell on the shards of the glass, which she had not removed, and her chest tightened from the memory. She hasn't slept since Dave left. I lay in bed, listening to the silence, trying to understand how everything could collapse so quickly. In the morning, she found a note on the kitchen counter, a short one, written in his sharp handwriting. "I'm at the hotel. The apartment is mine. Pack your things." She read it 3 times, feeling tears burning her eyes, but instead of crying, anger flared inside her. He decided he could just kick her out. After 8 years together, after everything she'd done for him. Tracy grabbed the phone and dialed his number, her fingers trembling. He answered after the 4th ring, his voice as cold as the rain outside the window. "What do you want?" he asked, and there was not an iota of warmth in his tone. "Did you seriously leave me a note?" she almost shouted, her voice trembling with anger. "The apartment is mine. Pack your things. Do you think that's how it works, Dave?" "How else?" he answered sharply, as if he had been waiting for this call. "I'm paying for her, Tracy. Every month, every dollar is mine. You just lived here while I worked." "Just lived?" She laughed, but the laugh was bitter, angry. "You think money is everything, right? I was with you when we had nothing, Dave. I cooked you dinner while you were sleeping on the couch after your shifts. I supported you when you were afraid that you would be fired. Am I now furniture that can be thrown away? You yourself ruined everything." His voice became louder, but colder. "You brought some Jake here while I was on a business trip. You lied to me. It's not about the money, Tracy. It's about trust. I didn't cheat on you," she shouted, her fists clenched so that her nails dug into her palms. "How many times do I have to tell you? Yes, he was here. Yes, we drank, but nothing happened. Have you already decided that I am a whore and are kicking me out?" "I can't believe you," he said, and there was such heaviness in his words that she fell silent. "The apartment is mine. I'm filing for divorce. Leave." "You won't do this," she breathed, her voice wavering. "You can't just cross me out." "Already done," he hung up, and the silence hit her like a slap in the face. Tracy threw the phone on the sofa. Her breathing was rapid and uneven. She walked around the room, her eyes darting from the broken glass to the roses that still lay where he had left them. Rage boiled inside her, mixing with pain and fear. He called the lawyer. He wanted war, and she wasn't going to give up. She found the number of her old friend Jenna, who worked as a lawyer in a small firm in Brooklyn. Jenna answered immediately, her voice warm but worried. "Tracy, are you okay? Did something happen?" "Dave is filing for divorce," she said, her voice shaking, but she held on. "He wants to take the apartment. I need a lawyer, Jen, urgently." "Wow," Jenna breathed. "Okay, don't panic. I'll help. Come to me tomorrow. We'll sort it out. He won't take it away that easily, I promise." "Thank you," Tracy nodded, although Jenna couldn't see her. "I won't let him do this." She hung up and sank onto the sofa, her hands falling to her knees. The lawyers were coming into play, and she knew this was just the beginning. She heard her neighbors whispering in the elevator. Their voices came through the thin walls. "Did you hear screams yesterday? I think the Millers are getting a divorce." The friends were silent. Neither Kate nor Sophie called back after her missed calls, and Lindsay only sent a short, "Call me if anything happens." The world around her was shrinking, and she felt increasingly alone. But she won't give up. Not him, not his money, not his anger. She looked at the pieces on the floor and thought that maybe it was not only their marriage that had broken down, it was her old life. And now she had to decide how to build a new one. Tracy sat at a table by the window in a small cafe on the corner of their street, nervously fiddling with a napkin in her hands. The rain was still drizzling behind the glass, leaving thin streams on the display window, and she watched the drops merge into patterns, trying to distract herself from the lump in her throat. She was wearing a simple white blouse and jeans, nothing flashy, Nothing from the new Tracy, who danced in bars and bought designer dresses. She wanted to look like herself, the one Dave knew before all this chaos. In front of her stood a cup of latte, already cold, with foam that had settled into a gray film. She was waiting for him. After their last conversation, harsh, full of anger and pain, she sent him a message. "Let's meet. Please. I want to explain." He didn't answer right away, and she already thought that he would simply ignore her. But an hour later, a short message came. "Cafe on the corner. 3 o'clock." This was all she had, a tiny chance, one last attempt to reach him before the lawyers and papers completely tore their lives apart. The cafe door dinged and Tracy looked up, startled. Dave walked in, shaking the rain off his shoulders. He was wearing a dark sweater and the coat she had given him 2 years ago for Christmas, simple but elegant, just the way he liked it. His face was tired, with dark circles under his eyes, and his lips were pressed into a thin line. He noticed her, nodded, and walked up to the table without taking off his coat, as if he didn't intend to stay. "Hi," she said, her voice quiet, almost a whisper. She tried to smile, but the smile came out weak, trembling. "Hello," he sat down opposite her, without looking at her, and waved to the waiter. "Black coffee, please." Tracy waited for the waiter to leave, her fingers gripping the napkin tighter until it became a crumpled ball. She looked at him, at his profile, at his hands lying on the table, at his silence, which was louder than any words. She wanted to reach out and touch him, but she knew he would recoil. "Thank you for coming," she began when the waiter brought coffee and left. "I know you don't want to see me, but I need you to listen." Dave finally looked up, meeting her gaze. His dark eyes were cold, empty, and there was no hint of the warmth she had once seen in them. He was silent, sipping his coffee, and this silence put pressure on her, forcing her to speak faster. "I didn't cheat on you, Dave," she said, her voice shaking, but she tried to control herself. "I swear, yes, Jake was at our house. Yes, we drank wine, but nothing happened. He left after half an hour. I didn't sleep with him, didn't kiss him, nothing. You have to believe me." He placed the cup on the table, his movements slow, almost mechanical. "Must." His voice was low, with a slight hoarseness. "Why, Tracy, you lied to me. First, there was no one, then it was Jake. What should I think?" I panicked. She leaned towards him. Her hands lay on the table, closer to his, but not touching. "When you came in, I didn't know what to say. I didn't want you to think what you thought. I lied because I was afraid, but that doesn't mean I cheated." Dave looked at her. His gaze was heavy, piercing. He was silent, and this silence was worse than a scream. Tracy swallowed, feeling tears welling up, but she didn't let them fall. "I was lonely," she continued, her voice becoming quieter, softer. "You're always traveling, Dave. You leave in the morning, come back at night, or don't come back at all. I'm sitting in this apartment alone, and she's choking me. I started going to clubs and meeting people because I wanted to feel alive. Not your wife, not your shadow, but yourself. Jake, Kate, Sophie, they were just friends who didn't ask where my husband was or why I was alone. And you called him home," he finally spoke, his words sharp as a blade. "To our house, Tracy, while I was in Boston." "Yes," she nodded, looking down. "It was a mistake. He brought the wine, we chatted, and I felt needed. No more than half an hour. But I asked him to leave because I knew it was wrong. I didn't want to betray you." Dave was silent, his fingers tapping the edge of his cup. She waited with bated breath, hoping that he would say something, that he believed her, that he would forgive, that they could start again. But he just looked at her, and there was nothing in his eyes but fatigue. "I don't know which is worse," he said finally, his voice almost a whisper. "The fact that you lied, or the fact that you forgot about me so easily." "I haven't forgotten." She raised her voice, her hands clenched into fists. "I love you, Dave. Everything I did was because I missed you. You were out there somewhere, building your career, and I was lost here. I'm not making excuses, I just want you to understand." He looked away, looking out the window. The rain picked up, hitting the glass louder than her words. She saw his jaw tense, his lips pursed, and she knew she was losing him. Her heart was pounding, her fingers were shaking, but she made one last try. "We can fix this," she said, leaning closer. "I'll give up these parties, these friends, everything you want. Let's start again, Dave. Please." He looked at her again, and for a second she thought something flashed in his eyes, regret, perhaps, or longing. But then he stood up, pushing back his chair. His coat rustled as he adjusted his collar. "I need time," he said, his voice level, without emotion. "I don't know, Tracy. Not now." "Dave, wait!" She jumped up. Her hand reached out to him, but he had already stepped towards the door. "Please don't leave like that." He stopped for a second, his back to her, but did not turn around. "I'll think about it," he said over his shoulder and walked out, leaving her standing in the middle of the cafe. Tracy sank back into her chair, her breathing coming in quick, ragged breaths. She looked at his empty seat, at the cup of coffee he barely touched, and felt the tears finally break through. They flowed quietly, without sobbing, dripping onto the table. Her latte sat in front of her, cold and untouched, like their conversation. She waited for his words, his forgiveness, but he left, leaving her with this emptiness that was worse than any scream. The waiter walked by, giving her a sympathetic look, but she didn't notice. She sat looking out the window, where his silhouette disappeared into the rainy haze, and realized that this might be her last chance, and she missed him. Dave walked down the corridor of the Harrison and Partners office, clutching a folder with reports in his hand. The morning was cold and gray, and his mood perfectly matched the weather outside. He didn't sleep after meeting Tracy in the cafe. Her words, her tears, her "I was lonely" were spinning in his head like a broken record, but he couldn't find a drop of sympathy in himself. Only fatigue and dull irritation. He wanted to focus on his work, on the deal that would impress the council, but instead he felt everything around him begin to fall apart at the seams. He pushed the door into the meeting room, where his colleagues had already gathered: Mike, Emma, and a couple of other analysts. They fell silent as he entered, and Dave caught the quick glances they exchanged. Mike coughed, looking away, and Emma began leafing through her papers with exaggerated interest. Dave threw the folder on the table and sat down with his arms crossed. "What?" he asked, his voice sharp as a hammer blow. "Why are you all looking at me like I'm a ghost?" Mike shrugged, trying to smile, but it came out forced. "Nothing, old man. It's a rough morning, you know." "Don't lie." Dave leaned forward, his gaze piercing Mike. "You were whispering until I came in." "What's happening?" Emma sighed, putting down her pen. She was older than all of them, with short gray hair and a straightforwardness that Dave usually appreciated, but was now afraid to hear. "Okay, Dave," she said, looking into his eyes. "There are rumors about you and Tracy. They say you are getting a divorce. This is true." Dave felt his stomach tighten. He expected the gossip to reach the office. Manhattan was a small world where everyone knew everyone, but he didn't think it would happen so quickly. He clenched his fists under the table, trying to keep his face up. "This is my own business," he said, his voice cold but firm. "Not yours." "Maybe so," Emma shrugged, "but people talk. Someone saw you leaving the hotel yesterday. Someone heard screams from your apartment a couple of days ago. It got back to Harrison." "Before Harrison." Dave sat up straight, his heart skipping a beat. "Are you serious?" "Yes," Mike nodded, finally joining the conversation. "He asked me in the morning what was going on. Not directly, of course, but he hinted that he didn't want drama in the team, especially now that the board is discussing your promotion." Dave leaned back in his chair, feeling the blood pounding in his temples. Promotion. His ticket to another league, for which he worked for years, slept in the office, flew on business trips, while Tracy. He clenched his jaw, driving the image of her out of his head. But the thought that his boss's old man Harrison and his school of sharks in suits could ruin everything because of gossip was like a punch to the gut. "They can't cancel my promotion because of this," he said, more to himself than to them. "I closed the deal in Boston. My numbers are the best on the team." "They can." Emma looked at him almost with pity. "You know Harrison. He loves a clean reputation. Public dramas, divorces, scandals are not his style. He wants a manager who looks like a rock, not a soap opera character. Dave slammed his fist on the table and everyone jumped. "It's not fair," he growled. "I plow for their sake, and they will judge me because my wife." He fell silent without finishing. "What did my wife do? Did you bring someone else home? Lied to me?" He didn't want to say it out loud, not here. But the silence in the room spoke louder than words. Mike cleared his throat, Emma looked away, and Dave realized that the rumors had already taken root. "Just keep your head in the game," Mike said quietly. "Prove to them that this does not affect work. Maybe it will still work out." Dave nodded, but inside he was seething. He stood up, took the folder, and left the meeting room without saying another word. In the corridor, he leaned against the wall, closing his eyes. His promotion, his career, his life, everything hung in the balance because of her. And he didn't know what he hated more, her betrayal or the fact that it was now dragging him to the bottom. Tracy stood in the kitchen, looking at her phone on the counter. The screen was dark, no calls, no messages, only silence. She had just returned from a cafe where she had tried to talk to Dave, but his cold, silent departure had left a void in her that she could not fill. Her fingers still smelled like the coffee she never finished, and she automatically wiped them on her jeans, trying to shake the feeling off. She opened Instagram, scrolling through her feed as usual, but her gaze was caught by the lack of notifications. Neither Kate nor Sophie nor Jake had written to her since the night everything collapsed. She checked their stories. Kate posted a photo from some bar, Sophie showed off her new dress, Jake was filming the sunset from the roof. They moved on, laughed, drank cocktails, but it was as if she had been crossed out. She sent Kate a message yesterday, "How are you? Let's meet." But there was no answer. Sophie read it, "Call if anything happens," and also remained silent. Tracy threw the phone on the counter and walked around the apartment, her steps echoing off the marble floor. She felt like a ghost in this place, huge, cold, alien. Her friends from the parties, those who called her one of their own, who admired her style, have now disappeared like smoke. She remembered Kate patting her on the shoulder, Jake winking at her across the table, Sophie dragging her into boutiques. It was fun, bright, but apparently only while she was part of their party. Now that her life was falling apart, they didn't want to get dirty about it. She stopped at the window, looking out at the city. Below, people with umbrellas scurried about, cars hummed, life went on as usual. But for her, everything stopped. She thought about Dave, about his silence in the cafe, about his eyes, in which there was nothing but emptiness, and about those who turned away from her as soon as the smell of scandal began. Her phone vibrated, and she jumped, hoping it was him, but it was Jenna, her lawyer. "Tracy, I received the first papers from his side." Jenna's voice was businesslike, but soft. "He wants an apartment. Fully. We can argue, but it will be dirty." "Let him try," Tracy said, her voice firmer than she expected. "I won't leave empty-handed." She hung up the phone and looked at her reflection in the glass pail, with disheveled hair, but with a sparkle in her eyes. The scandal was growing, and she knew that this was just the beginning. But she had no intention of disappearing into him. Dave stood in the elevator, looking at his reflection in the mirrored walls. His face was pale, with dark circles under his eyes, and he carried an empty duffel bag, all he needed to take the rest of his life from the penthouse. A week had passed since their meeting in the cafe, a week full of calls from lawyers, short, sharp messages and silence that had become their new language. He didn't want to come back here, but Tom insisted. "Take your things before she changes the locks." And here he is, rising to their floor, feeling how each floor measures the last seconds of their marriage. The door to the apartment was slightly open, and he heard rustling inside, the sound of a suitcase zipping, footsteps, a quiet sigh. Dave pushed open the door and stepped into the living room, his boots leaving wet marks on the marble from the morning rain. Tracy stood by the sofa, bending over a large black suitcase. Her hair was pulled back into a messy bun. She was wearing an old t-shirt and jeans, and there were boxes and bags lying around her life, packed into chaotic pieces. She didn't turn around, but her shoulders tensed, as if she sensed his presence. "I came to get my things," he said, his voice smooth but hoarse with fatigue. He threw the bag on the floor and walked to the closet in the hallway without looking at her. Tracy straightened up, her hands hovering over her suitcase. She turned her head, and their gazes met for a second. Her eyes were red, but dry, and a mixture of pain and anger flashed in them. She turned away, continuing to fold her dresses, her movements abrupt, almost violent. "Take what you want," she said, her voice as sharp as a shard of glass. "This is your apartment anyway, right? Your victory." Dave didn't answer. He opened his closet, pulling out his shirts and suits that were still hanging on the hangers. The smell of his cologne mingled with her vanilla perfume, and it hit him like a memory their first night here, laughing as they unpacked boxes. He clenched his jaw, pushing away the image, and began throwing things into the bag, not caring whether they got wrinkled or not. Tracy slammed the suitcase shut, the zipper got stuck, and she pulled it with such force that the fabric almost tore. She straightened up, placing her hands on her hips, and looked at him, her breathing coming in quick, ragged breaths. "I hope your career keeps you warm at night," she said, her words laced with venom, "because you have nothing left." Dave froze, his hand clutching the jacket he had just taken off the hanger. He slowly turned to her. His face was stony, but something flashed in his eyes: pain, regret, anger. He didn't know himself. Her words cut him, but he didn't want to give her this victory, didn't want to show how deeply they hurt. "What do you have left?" he said, his voice quiet but heavy. "Your friends from parties? Your Jake? They abandoned you too, right?" Tracy shuddered, her lips trembled, but she quickly pulled herself together. She stepped towards him, her gaze sharp as a blade. "Don't you dare," she hissed. "You don't know how I feel. You left, you decided everything for us. You're the one who abandoned me, Dave." "I left because I couldn't stay," he raised his voice, throwing his jacket into his bag. "You brought someone else here, Tracy. You lied to me. What was I supposed to do? Forgive and forget? I didn't cheat on you," she shouted, her voice breaking, and she hit the back of the sofa with her fist. "How many times should I tell you? Yes, I was wrong. Yes, I allowed him to come, but I did not sleep with him, and you have already passed judgment on me." Dave looked at her, her scream echoing in his head. He wanted to believe her, a part of him still did, even after everything. But 2 glasses, her lies, her aloofness, it was too much to swallow. He turned away, throwing his bag over his shoulder, and walked to the window, looking out at the lights of Manhattan. The city shone, as always, indifferent to their pain, to their broken lives. "You could have told the truth from the very beginning," he said without turning around. His voice was quieter, but there was bitterness in it. Maybe then everything would be different. Tracy was silent, her breathing the only sound in the room. She looked at his back, at his tense shoulders, and felt tears welling up, but she didn't let them fall. She didn't want to cry in front of him, not now that he was leaving, taking the last pieces of their past with him. "You could have stayed," she finally said, her voice almost a whisper. "You could have listened to me, but you chose your pride." Dave didn't answer. He stood at the window, looking at the skyscrapers, at the lights that once seemed to him a symbol of their dreams. Now they were just a background, beautiful, but empty. He heard her begin to pack her suitcase again, and heard the zipper finally close with a sharp sound. He didn't turn around, didn't want to see her face, her eyes, which could break his resolve. "I'll call a taxi," she said, her voice becoming smoother and more businesslike. "I'll leave in an hour. You can do whatever you want with this apartment." He nodded, still looking out the window. His bag hung over his shoulder, heavy with things, but light compared to what he had left here. He heard her pick up her suitcase and her footsteps heading towards the door, and only then did he turn. She stood at the threshold, her hand clutched the handle of her suitcase, and in the other there was a telephone. She was dialing a taxi number. "Goodbye, Tracy," he said, his voice hoarse but firm. She looked at him, her lips trembled, but she did not answer. Instead, she opened the door and walked out, her suitcase clattering along the hallway floor. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and Dave was left alone. He walked up to the sofa, where the roses were still lying, now completely withered, with fallen petals. He took them in his hands, feeling the thorns dig into his skin, and threw them into the trash can. Then he returned to the window, looking out at the lights of Manhattan. They were as bright as the day they moved here, but now they meant nothing to him. He stood there, silent, until the sound of the taxi faded in the distance, taking Tracy out of his life. Tracy stood on the sidewalk in front of their building, her suitcase leaning heavily on the curb, her bag hanging over her shoulder, digging into her skin. The rain stopped, leaving behind a wet sheen on the asphalt and a cold wind that ruffled her hair. She raised her hand, calling for a taxi, and the yellow car immediately emerged from the traffic, stopping at the side of the road. The driver, an older man with a gray mustache, jumped out to help her with her luggage, but she shook her head, opening the trunk herself. Her movements were abrupt, almost mechanical, as if she was afraid to stop and give herself time to think. "Where are we going, miss?" the driver asked, getting behind the wheel and looking at her through the rearview mirror. Tracy froze, her hand clenching the door handle. Where? She didn't know. She had no plan, no place she could go right now. Lindsay in Brooklyn offered to spend the night, but it was too far, too humiliating showing up to an old friend with suitcases and a divorce story. Hotel, she could afford herself a couple of nights, but then what? She took a deep breath, feeling the cold air burn her lungs. "Just go for now," she said finally, her voice quiet but firm. "I'll tell you where to turn." The driver shrugged, started the engine, and the car moved off, joining the traffic on Fifth Avenue. Tracy leaned back in her seat, her gaze sliding along the familiar streets, boutiques, coffee shops, the faces of passers-by hurrying home. She clenched her hands into fists, feeling her nails dig into her palms, and tried to banish the image of Dave standing by the window. His silence, his coldness, his goodbye, all this was like a knife that she plunged into herself, allowing their life to fall apart. She looked at her suitcase through the glass of the back seat. There was everything she had managed to collect: clothes, several books, a couple of old photographs that she could not leave. Her new life fit into one suitcase, and the thought was both terrifying and liberating. She remembered their first apartment in Brooklyn, tiny, with a leaky faucet and a creaky floor. Then they also had few things, but it was warm. There was us. Now there was no we, and she was driving to nowhere with a suitcase full of the past and emptiness ahead. "Are you okay, miss?" The driver's voice snapped her out of her thoughts. He looked in the mirror again, his brows furrowed. "Yes," she lied, forcing herself to smile. "I'm just tired." He nodded without insisting, and Tracy turned to the window. The car turned into an intersection, and she saw their building for the last time, tall, glass, with lights that blinked like stars. She knew Dave was there in the doorway, watching her drive away, and this thought made her heart sink, but she did not allow herself to look back. Dave stood in the doorway of the penthouse, his hand still on the handle he had just closed behind Tracy. Her steps faded in the corridor, the sound of the elevator cut her off from him, like scissors cutting a thread. He heard the taxi honk downstairs and the door slam, and he knew she was gone. He walked to the window, looking down at the yellow car that flashes its headlights and disappeared around the corner. Her silhouette disappeared into the flow of the city, and he felt something inside him let go, not completely, but enough to breathe a little more freely. The apartment was empty. Tracy's suitcases were gone, her clothes were no longer lying on the floor, her scent vanilla and tartness began to fade, giving way to the sterile cleanliness of marble and leather. He walked into the living room, his boots clicking loudly on the floor, and stopped by the sofa. The roses he had brought a week ago lay in the trash, their petals crumpled in a black bag. He pulled them out, glanced at the wilted buds, and threw them back, brushing the dust off his hands. He returned to the door, locked it, and leaned his back against it. Silence enveloped him, thick, almost tangible. He felt relief light, like the wind that had finally blown away the cloud. She left. There will be no more of her voice, her tears, her excuses. But with this relief came bitterness, heavy as lead, settling in my chest. This was his dream penthouse, Manhattan career. He had achieved everything he had dreamed of in Ohio, but now, standing here alone, he realized that this dream had become a trap. Huge windows, designer furniture, city views, all of it was empty without her. He walked to the window, looking out at the lights of Manhattan. They shone as always, but now there was no promise in their shine. He remembered her words, "I hope your career warms you up at night," and smiled bitterly. Maybe she was right. Maybe he chose the job instead of her, instead of them. But now it's too late to think about it. The taxi took her away, and he was left alone in this cold, perfect place that was no longer home. Dave closed his eyes, feeling the fatigue wash over him. He didn't know what would happen tomorrow: lawyers, work, emptiness. But now he just stood there, listening to the silence, trying to figure out what he had lost and what he had won. And then he turned away from the window, turned off the light, and lay down on the sofa without undressing. The lights of the city continued to burn behind the glass, but he could no longer see them. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.